Hi, everybody. I'm Roy Firestone, and this is our weekly show on YouTube and Facebook Live. Sometimes people come into our lives, and even for a brief time, they make an imprint in our soul, and that imprint is really indelible. Now, you probably never heard or met Harry Colomby. If you didn't, you really missed quite a guy. And if you did, well, let's face it, you'd never forget him. We lost Harry on Christmas Day last year. He was 92 years old, and the virus prevented a proper memorial in December or January. But the other night in Los Angeles, friends and family finally had a chance to remember Harry. It was quite an evening to remember, too. Harry was born in Berlin in 1929. He and his family escaped Nazi Germany using Turkish passports. They briefly lived in France before coming to America on the Queen Mary. Well, when they got to New York, Harry was just still a little boy. He was told that he'd never get anywhere in this country unless he learned English. So Harry learned English by memorizing the dictionary. He grew up curious and scholarly. His older brother, Jules, played the horn. His little brother, Bobby Colomby, played drums. You might know that name, Bobby Colomby. He founded the supergroup Blood, Sweat, and Tears. The whole Colomby family loved music, particularly jazz. Now, Harry was educated at Columbia, became an English teacher at Far Rockaway High School in Queens. 3 Nobel laureates came from that school, so did Bernie Madoff, but trust me, none of them had more interesting lives than Harry Colomby did. Harry met jazz legend Thelonious Monk at a jazz club and struck up an unlikely friendship. While still an English teacher, Monk asked Harry to be his manager.
I'm driving, right? He looks at me and says, "You want to be my manager?" Like that. It didn't take me more than a few seconds. This man that I admired more than anybody, any other musician whom I love all the musicians that are good, but he was something special. Asking me to manage, I never managed anything, right? I said, sure. And at that moment I knew my life would be totally different, right? He said, cool, teacher's a manager, that's good, you get rich, you get 10%, I make money, you make money. And I said to him in the car, I said, I'll tell you something. I've never managed anybody in my life. I don't know how rich we're going to get, but I'm going to promise you something, that in your lifetime, you're going to be recognized.
Harry managed Thelonious Monk for about 14 years. Harry was a brilliant guy, but a little quirky, somewhat eccentric. He gave up teaching, and he decided he wanted to be an entertainment manager, first managing jazz legend Mose Allison, then later on, the comic John Byner. He wrote or co-wrote most of Byner's stand-up routines, in fact. Then one night, somewhere in the late 80s, Harry saw an aspiring stand-up named Michael Keaton. He saw in Keaton more than just a funny man, though he certainly was that. He saw an actor. Harry would produce and manage Keaton in some of the early films, co-wrote and produced Mr. Mom, but he knew Keaton could do a lot more than that. So he urged Michael to take on serious roles and helped him get the role in Clean and Sober. Harry Colomby was instrumental in Keaton's career and even negotiated the first Batman roles, too. Now, personally speaking, I met Harry very late in his life. His brother Bobby was kind enough to introduce me to him. And frequently, Bobby and my friend Steve Edwards and Harry we'd have lunch. We'd tell stories. We'd share a lot of laughs and invite others to meet Harry as well. Harry held court and broke everybody up, including Michael, who once said, Harry was the only manager funnier than me, funnier than any comedian. Well, then Harry had a stroke. And with that came aphasia. It's a language disorder that affects your ability to communicate. Harry couldn't talk well, or sometimes he couldn't even talk at all. But he enjoyed every lunch, every story. He never lost that sense of humor, and he was funny. Well, the other night, we remembered Harry at a small celebration of life in Los Angeles. We remembered that goofy side and the thoughtful side, the offbeat side. When Michael Keaton got up to speak, he was just overcome with emotion. He wept as he remembered a guy who was so instrumental to his career and his life. It was a powerful and funny and sad and beautiful moment in that memory. I didn't get to call Harry my friend for very long, maybe 10 years, but it was long enough to hear his laugh when I told him some silly anecdote or tried to jog his memory as I recited an old John Byner bit. I was so lucky to know Harry. He was like an island in a sea of Hollywood big shots, and though he may have been as accomplished as almost any of them, probably more, great movie scripts, managing Monk, helping navigate careers of great artists, writing screenplays, Harry never had the big shot disposition. And I love to hear his stories, like the night he met Monk, and his observations of Miles Davis, and his twinkle in his eye when I asked if he'd ever write a book about his unlikely story, escaping those Nazi thugs, then going to Columbia, then becoming a school teacher, to manager, to comedy writer, to his pride in his brother Bobby, and that fantastic musical career. Well, if it weren't for Bobby introducing me to Harry, and Harry and I trading stories and sharing laughs, if it weren't for Bobby, I really would have missed knowing a very, very wonderful man who I loved dearly. And even after he had the stroke and he couldn't talk well or much at all, we shared many a meal, and he enjoyed our weekly lunches and the repartee with Steve and Bobby and myself. And he always got the joke, sometimes even the brunt of the joke, but he always laughed with us. I didn't get to know Harry very long, as his family or many of his friends did, but it was long enough to know that he loved his life and his times and saw so many of his dreams manifested in the work of other people that he supported. He was a wonderful, wonderful man, funny but sweet as hell, and above all, the kindest person you'd ever want to meet. I was lucky to know him. He made it to 92. That may be long enough for most people, but for me it really wasn't long enough. I was just wild about Harry. That's our show. We'll see you next week.